Rochester, New York. Population, 300,000. Unemployment, somewhere above the national average, depending on which year you pick and how honest you're feeling. There is a building downtown, 343 State Street, that used to be the center of the photographic world. George Eastman built it. For more than a century, the name on the side of it told you everything you needed to know about this city. It told you who fed the school districts, who built the hospitals, who signed the paychecks. It told you that a company which had once taught the world how to see itself was headquartered right here in upstate New York, and that it was not going anywhere. It went somewhere. January 2012, 124 years after George Eastman founded the Eastman Kodak Company, it filed for bankruptcy. 145,000 employees at its peak. 17,000 at the end. Here is the question this film is going to sit inside for the next 17 minutes. How does the company that taught America how to remember things forget to remember itself? The answer is not incompetence. It is not bad luck. It is something harder to name and harder to forgive. A choice made by intelligent people with full information because the truth was too expensive to accept. Before we get there, you need to feel what was lost. Think about what photography meant before Kodak. It meant professional equipment and darkroom chemicals and a skill set most people never developed. It meant that the people in your life, the ones at the table, the ones blowing out the candles, the ones you loved, existed only in memory because capturing them required expertise you didn't have. George Eastman changed that in 1888 with a slogan that is still one of the greatest pieces of marketing copy in American history. You press the button, we do the rest. Not our product is technically superior. Not trusted by professionals. You press the button, the power shifts, the camera becomes yours. By the mid-20th century, that yellow box was everywhere. You could see it from 30 feet down a drugstore aisle. The color alone told you what you needed. It was the color of sunlight, of summer, of the thing you were about to capture. There was a ritual if you grew up in the era. You loaded the film, 24 exposures, sometimes 36 if you were feeling ambitious, which you usually weren't. And then you rationed them. You thought before you shot. You considered whether the moment deserved one of your 24. You dropped the roll-off at the drugstore on Thursday, and you picked up the prints on Saturday. And the interval between those two events was a kind of anticipation that has no equivalent in the digital world. The wait was part of it. Kodachrome film. Paul Simon wrote a song about it in 1973, which tells you something. Not a jingle, a song. Kodachrome gives us those nice bright colors, gives us the greens of summers. He was describing a photographic stock, and it became a meditation on memory itself. That is how embedded this company was in the culture. At its peak in 1988, Kodak employed 145,000 people worldwide. It held 90% of the US film market, 85% of US cameras. Revenue would reach $16 billion by 1996. In Rochester, the company didn't just employ people, it built the city. Eastman gave away his personal fortune to schools and hospitals and concert halls. The phrase, "a Kodak moment," had entered the English language as a synonym for something worth preserving forever. That is what glory feels like when you are inside it. It feels like permanence. It was not permanent. Here is what you need to understand about how Kodak made money. Kodak was not in the camera business. Cameras were a delivery device. A camera was the machine you bought once so that you would buy film for the rest of your life. Film was the drug. High margin, consumable, repeat purchase. Every roll you loaded, every print you developed, every chemical bath order that came through a drugstore counter, that was profit. That was the engine. When you understand that, the fault line becomes visible. The fault line was always there. Kodak's entire business model was built on the assumption that capturing images would always require a physical, consumable medium. Film, paper, chemicals. The moment that assumption became false, the entire enterprise was at risk. And in 1975, in a lab in Rochester, New York, a 24-year-old Kodak engineer named Stephen Sasson built the device that made that assumption false. He called it a digital camera. It weighed 8 pounds. It was built from spare parts, a film transport mechanism, a Super 8 movie camera lens, 16 nickel-cadmium batteries, and a digital cassette tape for storage. It captured a single black and white image at a resolution of 0.01 megapixels. It took 23 seconds to record that image to tape. Sasson showed it to his managers. Management's reaction was cautious. The technology was noted, acknowledged, and set aside. A curiosity without a commercial path, in a company whose commercial path was already paved in yellow boxes and silver halide. The flaw was not that Kodak's engineers couldn't see the future. The flaw was that they could. They saw it clearly, and they looked away. The world did not wait for Kodak to decide. 1981. Sony releases the Mavica, the first commercial electronic still camera. It doesn't use film. The image goes directly to a small magnetic disc. The quality is poor. The price is high. Nobody outside electronics trade publications pays much attention. Inside Kodak, people are paying attention. Internal studies, produced in the early 1980s, some of which have since become public, warned that digital imaging could eventually displace film and fundamentally reshape photography. The reports reach senior management, but Kodak continues prioritizing its enormously profitable film business. The growth projections for the film division are too strong. The transition, they reason, is still far enough away. 1990, Adobe Photoshop ships. The image, for the first time in history, is not a physical object. It is software. It can be copied, altered, transmitted, and stored without ever touching a piece of paper. The photographic industry does not fully absorb the implications of this for several years. Kodak never fully adjusts its business model to the implications of a software-driven photographic world. 1992. Kodak launches Photo CD, a system for storing digital images on disk. The technology is legitimate, ahead of its time, actually, but the product is priced for professional markets and built without a consumer ecosystem to support it. It quietly vanishes. Kodak treats this not as a lesson about digital distribution, but as evidence that consumers aren't ready. 1994. Apple releases QuickTake, the first consumer digital camera under $1,000. The resolution is still limited, but the direction is unmistakable. 1996. Kodak's revenue peaks, $16 billion. The company is, by every financial metric, at the height of its power. It is also, by that same moment, standing directly on the edge of the cliff it helped carve. This is the counterfactual that haunts every case study of this company. In 1996, Kodak had the brand. It had the distribution. It had the engineering talent. It had already invented the core technology. It had conducted the studies. It had 17 years of lead time on the digital future it had helped create. A version of Kodak could have survived, could have led. The window was not closed. The window was wide open, and Kodak was standing at the other end of the room, selling film. The first crack is never the last one. It is only the first one. By the early 2000s, digital camera sales had surpassed film camera sales in the United States. This is not a disruption anymore. This is a rout. Kodak does not go quietly. To their credit, and this is a credit that makes the whole story more painful, not less, they try. They build a digital photography division. They fund it. They hire engineers. They produce competitive products. They are not asleep. They are awake and running in the wrong direction at exactly the right pace to feel like progress. The EasyShare digital camera line launches in 2001. On specifications, it is credible. The deeper problem is structural. Every dollar of digital revenue replaces a dollar of film revenue at a fraction of the margin. Film was consumable. Cameras are not. You sell someone a digital camera once. You sold someone film every month. The economics of digital photography, even when the product succeeds, cannot replicate what film had built. This is the mechanism. This is the thing that looks like corporate cowardice from the outside and feels like financial responsibility from the inside. Kodak's shareholders needed returns. Kodak's film business was still generating them. The digital business required investment now for returns that were speculative and distant. Quarter by quarter, the choice that felt reasonable turned out to be lethal. 2001 through 2004. Kodak eliminates 35,000 jobs attempting to fund a digital transition that is already 3 years behind the market. These are not positions being relocated or restructured in any meaningful sense. These are people in Rochester who have worked at Kodak for 20 years, who bought houses in the neighborhoods the company built, whose kids went to the schools Eastman endowed, receiving a notice and a severance package and a parking lot. 2003, CEO Daniel Karp announces that Kodak will exit the film camera business entirely. This is meant to signal commitment to digital. What it signals to the market is the opposite. It is an admission, finally on the record, that the core business is over. The stock falls sharply. It never meaningfully recovers. The tragedy of this moment is that it is the right decision. It is simply about 7 years too late. Announced in 1996, at peak revenue from a position of strength, it would have been a bold pivot. Announced in 2003 from a position of retreat, it reads as a concession. And then, in 2007, something happens that has nothing directly to do with Kodak and everything to do with Kodak. Apple releases the iPhone. The iPhone is not marketed as a camera. It is marketed as a phone and a music player and an internet device. But it has a camera built into it, a mediocre one by 2007 standards. And because it is always in your pocket, and because it sends photos immediately without printing or developing or waiting, it begins to do something no digital camera has managed to do. It eliminates the occasion for photography as a separate act. Kodak had managed to participate in the transition from film to digital cameras. It would not survive the transition from cameras to phones. Nobody asked for a Kodak moment when the phone in your pocket could already capture the moment before you finished deciding it was worth capturing. By this point, Kodak is not selling pieces of a future. It is selling pieces of itself. By 2011, Eastman Kodak stock had fallen below $1. The company received NYSE non-compliance notices that put its listing in jeopardy. A company that had once been a cornerstone of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, one of the blue chips, one of the permanent ones, was being removed from the boards like a closed account. January 19, 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. 124 years after George Eastman introduced photography to ordinary people. 73 years after Kodachrome film, the film that would inspire a song. 37 years after a young engineer in this same company's lab built the device that would eventually make the whole enterprise obsolete. At the time of filing, Kodak employed approximately 17,000 people, down from 145,000 at peak. Rochester, New York had lost roughly 50,000 Kodak jobs between 1988 and 2012. Not to a competitor in another country, not to a single catastrophic event, to a slow 24-year reckoning with a decision made in 1975 in a lab down the hall. Stephen Sasson, the engineer who built the first digital camera, worked at Kodak for 35 years. He watched them shelve his invention. He watched them revive it too late. He watched the company he had given his career to collapse around the technology he had given them. He received a National Medal of Technology and Innovation from President Obama in 2009. The same year, Kodak was losing $100 million a quarter. The people who gave their careers to this company were not naive. They believed in something real. The film coming off those production lines was real. The jobs were real. The communities they built were real. The Kodak moment, the idea that some things are worth stopping to preserve, was not advertising copy. It was a genuine human instinct, and Eastman found it and bottled it and sold it back to people who were grateful for the reminder. That was real. And then it was gone. And the parking lots were full for the last time. And the lights came off floor by floor, and Rochester got quieter. So, how does the company that taught America how to remember things forget to remember itself? The answer is that it didn't forget. That is the thing. Kodak did not fail because it couldn't see the future. It failed because it could see the future perfectly and couldn't afford to live in it. The internal reports were written. The digital camera existed. The studies were circulated. The executives who shelved them were not blind. They were protecting a profit margin that the entire company, its workforce, its shareholders, its communities, depended on in the present against a disruption that would arrive in the future. This is not uniquely a Kodak story. It is the story of Blockbuster, which understood streaming and chose not to scale it. It is the story of Sears, which had a catalog operation that was essentially Amazon before the internet existed and let it die. It is the story of every dominant incumbent that mistook the terms of its current advantage for the shape of the future. The innovator's dilemma is not that companies can't see the disruption coming. It is that they cannot afford to see it, because the cost of acting on it in the short term is the destruction of the very thing that funds the action. What makes Kodak different, what makes it a purer version of this tragedy, is the dramatic irony. Kodak didn't just fail to innovate. Kodak innovated first. They invented the device. They built it. They held it in their hands in 1975 and understood, as clearly as anyone in the world, what it meant. And they put it in a drawer. That is not stupidity. Stupidity would be more forgiving. It would mean they didn't know. They knew. The internal reports from the early 1980s exist. The decision to delay a full commitment to digital was conscious and reasoned, and, in the logic of the quarterly report, defensible. It is the tragedy of people who understood the situation completely and still couldn't move. George Eastman's democratic promise, photography for everyone, not just professionals, was eventually fulfilled, just not by Kodak. The iPhone completed what Eastman started. The camera in your pocket, producing infinite images at no marginal cost, is the logical endpoint of you press the button, we do the rest. Eastman would have recognized it. The company bearing his name did not get to be part of it. What was lost is not the technology. Technology advances. What was lost is the ritual, the waiting, the rationing, the Saturday morning of prints, and the specific human texture of a moment preserved in silver and light on paper you could hold in your hand. The shoebox in the living room, the photograph that doesn't disappear when you upgrade your phone. That is the elegy, not for Kodak the company, for the Kodak moment, the belief that some things deserve to stop for. Stephen Sassen's original 1975 prototype is in a museum display case now. The black box, the size of a toaster, built from spare parts in a Kodak lab. It still works. It still captures images. Kodak invented one of the technologies that would ultimately help unravel its business model, and it has been behind glass for 50 years. That is not tragedy. That is a choice. If this film hit you somewhere, the channel is Sector Down. We make documentaries about industries and companies that shaped American life and then collapsed. The ones where the story is more complicated than failure and the loss is more than financial. Subscribe if you want to understand how things that seem permanent actually end. Leave a comment if Kodak meant something to you, or if you remember the ritual, the drop-off, the pickup, the prints. We read them. The next film is already in production. We'll see you there.